What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the third album by Paramore. Basically, this album is called Brand New Eyes, and it came out in the fall of 2009. Now, I reviewed Paramore's 2007 album Riot back in the spring of 2022, and that had some hits on there, and I definitely remember liking that album. This is the follow-up to that. I haven't reviewed Paramore since February. I reviewed their 2005. I reviewed their 2005 album also, but I wanted to get this one to see what it's about. It's a very malaised album, but it's also pretty makeshift. I like this kind of emo pitch that this project kind of has. Maybe it doesn't have a single on the sheer degree of like Misery Business or something like that, where Riot was a pretty big crested album that lasted between 2007 and mid late 2008, something like that. I feel like this one has five singles, more singles this time, or about maybe one more single than last time, but the single quality minus like the only exception just doesn't have the sheer hit potential. Now, it's not to say this album is bad. It's going to get a rather high score, but I just would have to say it's just kind of more rock chart heavy as far as that kind of goes. So I look after it. It's just a lot of malaise kind of makeshift on here. It's pretty much more presentable. It's just more kind of tone for like it's kind of more tone for blue collar work and music marketplaces as far as that kind of goes. But I look at the concept that there are like I would say minus the only exception, I would say maybe Ignorant is like a song that kind of has some crossover appeal, but for the most part this album's kind of strictly more kind of in the sense of like the rock charts. And I do remember a couple of singles even before I reviewed like Riot. I do remember hearing a couple of those on the radio and such, but this album is I have less kind of memories with. I do remember Haley Williams having a hit single around this time with B.O.B. called Airplanes, which is a pretty charting song, but I just don't remember too many songs of this particular album, but it is a good one. I do have to say that I like the concept of this project just because I do like the makeshift kind of orientation that this project kind of has. This is a good, pretty packaging. This is a pretty good packaging of a project here as far as that kind of went. So there's just some good stuff, and it just has the right kind of emo pitch. I feel like this album really is kind of a lot more straightforward, and I don't want to say full blown Platonic, but it just has a lot more kind of airtight packaging this time. Where I felt like there was just more of a jivey time on Riot a little bit more, and then I also felt like the album from 2005, which I forget what that one's called, but the album from 2005 was basically a lot more kind of indie and kind of had this little bit more summer haze towards it. This album kind of has a lot more autumn malaise, which I do like with the packaging behind it. I really do feel like this is a Muzak kind of album. I really do feel like this is a Muzak kind of album that has this sort of packaging for that sort of context, just stuff that you can play in the car, at work, some of those type places, out and about, just hearing things. Not so much in like a shopping mall sense, but maybe just like places where you would be just a consumer and some of that type of stuff. But it's just interesting to possibly hear this sort of album at like Target or something like that. It's a little bit more malaised and kind of sullen for like the typical kind of Walmart or Bed Bath and Beyond or Target type fare or something like that. But I would have to say it's a good example of like something that you could hear in a more kind of just more off to the side or just kind of a little bit more moody kind of places, something like that. Can't really think of them right now, but that's kind of the concept. So it is some music. I definitely feel like this is some good makeshift malaise here. So we'll go ahead and get to the singles. Yeah, there's five of them. So I think there was only four on Riot, but there might have been five. But I would say it's about the same packaging, just a little bit more hardcore rock charts and a little bit more specific rock charts, more so than like the crossover that Riot kind of had. But the first single is Ignorance, and this is kind of a moody, kind of snappy blue collar single in an emo sense. Definitely feel like it's pretty presentable, and it's a good boppish kind of jaunt. And it kind of has that spooky malaise about it also. Yeah, it kind of has that spooky malaise about it also. It's just a good one to kind of hear in like the fall as far as that kind of goes. Just a nice one. I mean, the thing about this song is it's kind of like the sequel to like Misery Business. Kind of also reminds me of like something that you would hear off of like Fallout Boy or something like that. Just kind of real kind of snappy kind of rock riff tempo as far as that kind of goes. It's just kind of the entry one is a good lead single as far as that kind of goes. Just a nice one. Some of the other singles don't have the same pitch as this one, but I do like the concept of getting this one. It's just kind of a more kind of alternative rock type charts of a hit more so than like some of the emo moody pitches that are like on songs like Playing God or something like that. But we'll get to that. So Brick by Boring Brick. I feel like Brick by Boring Brick, the second single, is a nice evening venue bop. It has a good bouncy jive about it, and it's a decent makeshift kind of feel also. just would have to say this is a nice one for kind of like pretty much one that you could hear on the radio and that does stuff. Some good kind of malaise for just kind of being out and about, but it's just kind of in a more evening sense where it's not just kind of in a more evening sense where it's not full blown at the job or something like that, but just kind of more just got done. Maybe you're getting ready to step out a little bit. Just kind of the in between type feel. Just some good pacedness for having a good jive about it. Just like the concept of, I do feel like this one could kind of be a place just at like a bar or a pub or something. I feel like this is a good, I feel like Brick by Boring Brick is one that could be played at like a bar or a pub or something in that sort of sense. Just some place where there'd be food and booths and that sort of stuff just to kind of munch and have some good times. But this would have to say it's a nice one. It's a little bit more like, it's a little bit more comfortable than Ignorance, where I feel like Ignorance was just kind of the snappier one that you could just hear, and that's probably like the banner one that caught most of like the airplay. But I feel like this is a good follow up that just kind of has a more comfortable feeling as far as that kind of goes. Just a nice one. The only exception is the third single, and this is an almost song for me. This one is a very much preppy acoustic cut, and it's a malaise kind of lovey bop, I would say, but the acoustic is a little bit too upbeat for my taste. I feel like this one had the biggest appeal of the album. This is probably one of Paramore's biggest hits at the time. It was his highest hit up to like 2014 or so, but I would have to say that like the concept, this is just one where, you know, I do like acoustic tunes, but I think the concept when acoustic is kind of peppier and more, I feel like when acoustic is peppier and more upbeat, somehow it loses like the, I don't know. There's some folks that like preppier acoustic. There's some folks that like, you know, more malaise kind of acoustic. I just prefer the more sullen acoustic that just speaks more volume to me. But this is an acoustic version that just has a more optimistic tone about it. I mean, the thing about it is, though, is it's kind of malaise. I mean, it's preppy, but it's kind of like a happy, lovesick kind of format, I would say, where it's kind of got some happiness, but it's really kind of bittersweet. That's kind of, I feel like that tone, at least in the lyrics, kind of feel like that tone, at least in the lyrics, gives it some malaise, but I still feel like the production, the instrumentation on the song is just more preppy than I would have wanted. So it's just kind of one where I'm kind of on the fence about it, but maybe I would like it down the road. But it's just is very upbeat more so than the context of how I would have a taste for. That's kind of the thing. But Careful. Careful is the fourth single. This is a hazy kind of night venue malaise, I would say. It's got a nice tempo and energy about it. It's a social night and kind of it's good for a social night, and it's an affable kind of regular time. This is definitely one that's pretty similar to Ignorance and Brick by Boring Brick, where these are some good stepping out kind of ones to kind of hear. This one is kind of less makeshift. This is about the only real one of the singles I don't feel like has like, Careful's the only one out of the 5 singles that I don't feel like has some sort of makeshift or blue collar feel about it, but I kind of look after it. It's not to say like that's a bad thing. It's just kind of the concept that this is like a real kind of carefree and more kind of loosen up kind of song that was probably needed. I feel like some of these songs are just good to get to make sure it's not too platonic and straightforward the whole way through. So that's a good one. It kind of has like some kind of hazy kind of night venue gauze about it that just makes it for a good time. Definitely pretty nice one. And then Playing God is the 5th single, and this is the one. Playing God is the 5th single. This is like typical Paramore here. It's some moody kind of malaise about it. It's an emo hit, and it's kind of vintage Paramore. I would definitely say it's a languid kind of makeshift song, but it's kind of catchy and has a good vibe about it. Just a real kind of malaise, kind of just like sullen, kind of typical kind of autumn weather kind of Paramore type tune. Definitely in that sort of sense. Definitely one for like late September, October, November type fare when things are kind of gloomy and more kind of scraggly looking outside as far as that kind of goes. Just really like the feel of this one. This is a pretty nice one. This typical kind of moody kind of feel about that. Haley Williams does a good job with conveying that. So it's a regular kind of scream queen type altitude as far as that kind of goes. Just a nice one for that sort of autumn fare. So I like that one. It's probably one of my more favorite ones out of the singles. I like Ignorance and Playing God probably the most. But I would say that all 5 of the singles in some degree are good. Probably only exception is like the one I'm on the fence about, but they're still all pretty good. So out of 11 songs on here, I wound up recommending to you 9.5. So the really only song I don't recommend is just Misguided Ghosts, which to talk about that one, I just really couldn't get into the production of that one. If you saw it, you know, paying attention to the complaints I had about the only exception, I feel like Misguided Ghosts was just a worse variation of that. It wasn't acoustic, but just kind of had a more kind of awkward, upbeat kind of feel about it. I was expecting by the title Misguided Ghosts for that one to have been a little bit more clever, but it just was kind of like a real kind of boggled and muddled kind of malaise production on there that just didn't really have that much appeal in my opinion. So I kind of looked at that one. That one was kind of a slack and slight kind of one. But other than that, every other song on this project I enjoyed in some fashion. So just to talk about some of these, I feel like if you like songs like Playing God, another highlight for that one and that sort of situation is All I Wanted. And this one's like a very sullen and kind of moody, ruminating cut. All I Wanted is like a very sullen and moody kind of ruminating cut. It feels like a darker version of post grunge, some of the stuff that folks were doing, like Nickelback and some of those type folks. It's just got a real grim kind of feel about it. I feel like definitely like some of these ones. I mean, Paramore on songs like Decode and Playing God and some of those type ones. I do like that kind of somber and kind of glaring kind of autumn pitch as far as that kind of goes. It's good. They don't do that in overabundance. Like, I feel like that's definitely some pitch Paramore when that happens, but they don't do it a ton on here. And I was almost thinking, because they were riding high off the energy of Decode from late 2008, I thought that they might do a song. I thought they might have more songs like that, but they didn't on this. They had like a whole different amount of pitches on this album, but I do feel like All I Wanted and Playing God are the closest things to Decode if you like that song from the Twilight soundtrack. But it's just a nice one. Turn It Off is some gauzy makeshift, I would say. It's typical kind of malaise day commerce. It's a factory hit, and it's a good vibe for late day. This is kind of one that reminds me of Paramore's 2005 album, some of those type hit ones that you would just hear 4:30, 5:30 p.m. when the sun is setting, that type of stuff. This is good for like some good winding down kind of after hours kind of feels, just in the day after hours as far as that kind of goes. Just a nice one for that. It's very gauzy in terms of the instrumentation about it. I feel like a nice upbeat one is kind of Feeling Sorry. This one kind of had some, like, there are a couple of upbeat songs on here in like rock riff senses, where not just acoustic upbeat, but kind of some peppy rock upbeat kind of ones. I feel like Feeling Sorry is a nice example of that. This is a nice evening bop. It has a decent jive about it for a night out. It's somewhat makeshift, but it's a good album cut. I feel like this one just kind of has like the right amount of pep. I mean, the lyrics kind of convey that it's a little bit more kind of fed up with things in terms of a relationship sense as far as that kind of goes. But I do like the concept of getting this one. It's just a nice kind of bop. Just kind of has that good jive for just somewhat stepping out. It's not full blown like a get crunk kind of party song, but it's just kind of one where it's like, hey, let's go do something, that sort of sense as far as that kind of goes. I do like the concept about that. It kind of has like the nice amount of pep about it. It's just kind of typical type altitude. It's kind of like Crush, Crush, Crush. I feel like it's just kind of like a more album cut version of Crush, Crush, Crush from Riot, I would have to say. It's that same sort of pitch, but I do like the vibe about it. Just has that right amount of pep, just necessary. Looking Up is some nice motivational pep, I would say. This is a good early day kind of pep song, and it's a good calmer song also. It's surprisingly spry for Paramore. I just feel like this is kind of like Paramore's version of like a hustle song telling you to get up and get it, some of those type moments. It's definitely good for some brunch time fare as far as that kind of goes. It's another one that's kind of like Feeling Sorry, that kind of has some good preppiness and pep about it. It's just interesting. I mean, despite the fact that this is kind of a moody and emo band, I feel like the concept behind some of these songs is just a nice orientation. So they do some of these well. I mean, I said that some of the pep on this album may not be wholesomely fitting compared to songs like Playing God and All I Wanted, but it does work. I mean, that's kind of the concept. It's just they were trying some different kind of things, some different kind of angles to go ahead and try out, and it actually works. That's kind of the concept, where it's not just a full-blown kind of moody kind of, it's not just a moody kind of slash your wrist kind of soul and kind of album the whole time. So I look after that concept just within that sense. There's some nice context about it on here. It's not quite a full-blown stark emo kind of album like it seemed like they did in the past. So that's kind of the thing. But Where the Lines Overlap is another nice one. This is like some jivey evening commute and venue punch. I would definitely say it has a nice mid makeshift feel, and it's some Muzak. I feel like this is definitely one for like the Muzak, where you would hear it just in like some of those places that have a more malaise and kind of more acute kind of moody kind of pitch as far as that kind of goes. Not just places like Hot Topic, but other places that you would hear some of like a more kind of distorted and kind of glaring kind of songs in that sort of sense. I mean, it's not a single, so maybe you would hear like Ignorance and Misery Business before this one, but it's just kind of, they really do have that sort of stuff on crank. I would say this is a good one for some Muzak, and this is good for some evening commute and a little bit of venue punch in there as well. I just would have to say, so that's some nice kind of pitch as far as that kind of goes. But I think that about covers the album. I think that's the snappy album as far as that goes. So this album's going to get a 10 out of 10, me liking 9.5 songs out of 11. Really, the only true song I didn't enjoy wholesomely was just Misguided Ghosts. So just would have to say it gets a 10 score. The social score I will go ahead and give. Like, I think I'll give the social score a 10 also, just because the album pitch, I mean, it has the makeshift songs on here. So songs like Turn It Off and Looking Up and like Where the Lines Overlap and like Ignorance and The only exception in some of those type songs really kind of have like the correct pitch as far as having a presentable kind of blue collar and just like a more soul and sense. Like the thing about this, when you listen to the album cuts, it's not quite as emo and moody, but when you listen to the singles, it kind of has that blue collar kind of moody sense. And the single sense, in terms of what the album conveys, in terms of like the radio airplay, it's very much the typical kind of moody and kind of atmospheric kind of like sullenness that like most emo bands kind of emit. But when you dive deeper into this project, it's really kind of not full blown light, but just not quite as sullen as like it appears to be. It's like it just doesn't have that same approach the more you dive into the album. But it is like I look after it in comparison to the moodiness, it's just not quite as sheer as much of that. Like I do feel like the songs on here do have some degree, but not compared to like things like Broken Side or things like Blood on the Dance Floor or things like like Fallout Boy or some of those type bands or something like that. It's lighter this time. I feel like it's just kind of more alternative and like it's kind of mild on like the emo moodiness, but it is a pretty good alternative highlights. That's kind of the concept, but it is an excellent album. So I just feel like that's kind of the concept. It's very presentable. It's kind of by the book, and it's very presentable. Just kind of straightforward and kind of has a good packaging of just like not just full blown platonic, but just having a good edge as far as being able to pay the bills and that type of stuff. It's just a good presentability about it with some good jive in there. Also, songs like Ignorance and Brick by Boring Brick and like Feeling Sorry are kind of some ones for getting turned up a bit. So there are some ones on there also for some jive. That's kind of the concept. So in terms of the future, Paramore dropped an album in 2023, so they have dropped recently. I'm going to have to get to some more of these. I am going to pretty much review all of Paramore. I would have to say I'm going to get to their 2013 and 2017 albums and the 2023 one, but this is definitely an excellent album. This is a, like pretty sheer project here. This is definitely up there with Riot in terms of some of their best, but then I pretty much would have to say I think I liked all three of the albums I reviewed by them, so there's some good stuff here.